It's just call me entitled.
Yeah. Hey, yeah, to be actually, because you're pretty tall, if I'm right, you have pretty long legs, don't you?
I'm exactly 6 feet tall, and my legs are long enough, and yeah, it's so
That's amazing. So you're currently, where are your current outlets? And also, could you send me some photos of your current products that you sell? Because you've got
sure.
the old stores and things like that, which is fantastic. I'll post
Right.
that. But could you tell me where your current stores are?
You know, at some point, so Sharon and I were very ambitious for many years,
Yes.
and then we got a little old, you know. So, I mean, the original store was Boise. Boise turned into Ketchum. Ketchum, and then Boise was our first commercial building that we found and redid, and then we had a tiny little store in Ketchum, and then we built our first commercial building in Ketchum with a penthouse over it, and like the first commercial building was, banks just, yeah, I'd like to borrow some money. Right, who are you? I mean, they know who we are,
Right,
because
right.
we did a lot of business to them, but we didn't have assets, we didn't have anything. So our first commercial building is just this guy who wanted to sell, and he just was very clever in figuring out a way that it could work, and it wasn't all up front, and it just he just made it happen. And then once you have one, then suddenly the banks are like, oh yeah, God, we're happy to give you money.
Yes,
They're just
yes.
you're fantastic.
We love you. Where
We
you been?
love you. Exactly. And um, so Ketchum, we then built our first. This would have been 30 years ago or so. Our
Oh, okay.
first
It's been a
uh,
while.
commercial building with a penthouse on top, and then we started a store in Jackson Hole, and we ended up actually buying the old Jackson drugstore, and then I was like, well, geez, these are both working well. Let's go. Let's do it again in Park City. And all along, the banks were like, oh yeah, sure, whatever. We'll give you any amount of money, and you've got all these assets, and so, and then 2008 hits.
Kaboom.
2008.
Kaboom.
And the banks are like, yeah, you're kind of, you're a little stretched out here. And, I mean, we'd never missed
Your
a
volume just
payment.
went down. You said you're a little stretched out. Is that okay?
A little stretched here. And they were like, and then they forced us into bankruptcy.
Oh, they did.
And they did.
You and a lot of other
And,
people.
huh?
You and a whole lot of other people.
And a whole lot of other people. And I mean, life is an education, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
I mean, you just can't put a positive or a negative on it. And, you know, bankruptcy was difficult. And Sharon was always the organized numbers person. I was the Asia person, and so it was really her fight much more than mine. And
Hmm.
she did not back down from anybody. And you know, we ended up being forced to sell the Jackson drugstore, which was an incredibly valuable piece of, I mean, it's, the
Downtown
most
property.
known structure in Jackson Hole. It's right on the corner of the of the square going to the park. It's
Yep.
this old stone building.
I know where it
It's
is.
been, what's that?
I said, I know where it is. I've been there on my
Yeah.
e-bike.
So, it so, I mean, at some point, and this wasn't that long ago, this was just 2017, that we were like, we did this. And so we sold the Jackson store, and then we leased it back. The interesting thing about doing that was that I just don't think you should make a lot of money until you're old enough to deal with it.
Good point.
And had we not been forced into bankruptcy and had to sell that building, and we could have ridden it out, the building would have been worth many more millions than we sold it for, and we sold it for 4.5. And it wouldn't have, the education of life wouldn't have been complete had there been too much money at an early time.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that in a town like Sun Valley or in Maui, where there's just this whole group of people that never ever had to work.
You said something to me on the plane the first time we met, and I disagreed with you, but I always like to hear what people have to say and consider it later on. And you said to me, we were talking about something, and I'm just excited to go to Hawaii, and we were talking about trustafarians and people that never had to work for money, and you said to me, be happy that you're not one of them. And I disagreed with you. I thought, I told you, I'm willing to risk it. Give me the option. I can always give the money away.
I want the easy way out.
Exactly, And so, but over the years of more time on this earth and learning more, I have come to agree with you that you've got, there's old Chinese proverbs called short sleeve to short sleeves in 3 generations. You've got
Right.
one person that works very hard, then he wants it easier for his son, and then the grandsons have it easier than everyone, and the money's gone.
Yeah.
And so over years, I've come to totally agree with your perspective.
Well, I mean, really, what's life? Life is an education.
Yes.
Right? And if you're not being pushed, if you're not being forced into things that are less than pleasant, and you figure out how to deal with them so that it is pleasant, because you're like, well, yeah, I'm learning here. And I mean, basically, what on your deathbed, what are you going out with?
Nothing.
Well, what you know.
What you know.
That's it. Just what you know.
Your time being a monk is coming out.
Well, yes, I did have that in my nature, and I still do. I mean, I still get up and I meditate in the morning and do qigong, and it's yeah.
So you say qigong. So did you do Chinese? Qigong is typically Chinese. Did you have a Chinese monk teacher?
Yeah, you just learn everything on the internet anymore.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Thank you.
I mean, I had a Tibetan Lama who was my teacher, and I went through this whole process, called Ngondro, which, you start off, you do 100,000 prostrations while doing a visualization, while doing a mantra, and I did that in a stone hut that we had, the local Nepalese guys built for us up where our Lama lived, at about 8,000 feet in the Himalaya. And I mean, we lived without visas. At some point after, I don't know, 8 or 9 months, Sharon decided she had to get back to the United States to get her child in school, and she had to go to the U.S. Embassy and say, hey, I haven't had a visa here for months, and so she was actually um, kicked out of the country. But at the same time, then she said, okay, Terry, this is how you deal with it. You say you go to the Nepalese immigration and you say, I lost my passport, and and so I did that, and I went to this guy, and he said, okay, well, I checked with Roxall and the other one near Lumbini, the other overland entrance. Well, how'd you get in here? Overland. Okay. Which entrance? I told him. I said Roxall. He said, come back in a couple days. I came back in a few days, and he said, well, I checked with not Roxall, the other one. Obviously, he decided he didn't need to keep his story straight. And he said, and they don't have any record of you going through here. And he looks at me and he says, this is going to cost you. And then with his fingers, he goes, 500 rupees. And at the time, if I had been getting my visa, it would have been like 2,000 rupees a month. And I had overstayed by 7 or 8 months. And so, I got a new visa. I got a new passport. I got a new visa, and
Discounted rate.
And it just turned out. It turned out great.
Wonderful.
But anyway, we lived up there in really. There's no electricity. There's no running water. It was a very sacred place because the person who took Buddhism into Tibet, his name was Padmasambhava in I think it was the 7th century, had stayed there. And there was a little spring way, way up high in this mountain. But we lived quite a ways above that. So you had to carry the water up this very steep. The Himalayas, not like these other mountains. They're steep. You can just fall off the side and die. Mountains just aren't, they're young and they're fresh and they're high. And so, to get water, you had to climb up this path from there to our house. There was no toilet facilities, or it was just like as primitive as you can get. Anyway, we stayed up there, and I did the initial 100,000 prostrations, which took months, and then the next step, which was a 100-syllable mantra, and then we were back. Then a few months later, and this was like the first time it wasn't the first time, but I also we bought a bunch of old Tibetan rugs at the time and brought them back and sold them. So, it'd been buying rugs off and on in different places. Not a lot because we didn't have much money, but at the time there were some really beautiful, rare things that didn't cost a lot and were worth quite a bit more.
So the common thread, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you love to travel. And as you're traveling, you're experiencing the culture. And as you're experiencing the culture, you got kind of involved with rugs. And that turned into a business, and then that turned into retail outlets, and it just kind of progressed and progressed.
Yeah. Um, I was always drawn to rugs. Even I was raised in a house with no rugs, with almost no art except for my uncle who was an artist, and we had a couple of his pieces. Yeah, I was just raised in this middle class Boise house with. I don't know where the thing came from.
Almost
I
intuitive.
don't. It was just yeah, exactly. It was just intuitive. I was just always drawn to them and as soon as I went overland the first time, I one of the first things I did was go into rug stores and just start coming to understand them a little bit. And then, so where is this so before Sharon and I lived, and I did that when we lived up in the mountains, and I did the known the prostrations and all of that. My second time trip to Asia, the first trip I had gone overland both ways. I ran out of money at some point.
Your parents sent you
Parents gave me
$200.
$200. At the time, I didn't have I didn't have like a pair of pants. I had these cotton drawstrings. I had no shoes. I had a couple of thin blankets. So I went into so maybe by the time I left Pakistan, I had $12, and then I got 200. I went into Kabul, and I hit the old bazaar in Kabul and bought old jeans. And back in those days, I mean, jeans were a big thing all over the world.
Yes.
And so I took these jeans, and then I stood on the streets of Mashhad, Iran, and I sold the jeans except for one pair, which I kept for myself. And I bought myself a pair of really thick Afghan hand-knitted socks, and I had a pair of flip-flops, and still I might have had a shirt or two, but basically I had a couple thin. I mean, I really looked like a scruffy India hippie, which there were a lot of those in those days.
So you didn't stick out.
No, it didn't stick out. Although, going through Afghanistan, the Afghan, the where I'd stay in Afghanistan, and the guys would look at me and go, "Yeah, you've been in India too long." So I got to Tehran, and I just got outside of town, and there's this great big arch outside of Tehran, and I started hitchhiking, and I hitchhiked to the border of first of all to Tabriz, and then from Tabriz, several rides. I got to the border of Iran and Turkey, and there was a Swiss truck driver there, and I asked him for a ride, and he took me to Zagreb, Yugoslavia, which all the way through Turkey and then through Bulgaria, I think it was. Yeah, Bulgaria at the time, which was completely Russia at the time. It was completely the other side of the Iron Curtain, and so you could just you couldn't hang out there. You just could pass. They just let you pass through. And then and Yugoslavia was similar, but not quite as strict as some of the other Iron Curtain countries. And so he dropped me off in Zagreb, and it was a truck stop. And by this time, it's like I'm in the northern hemisphere now. It's cold, and I walked into just a funky little restaurant where there were some trucks parked out in front, and there was an English guy there. And I said, "Hey, want to give me a ride?" And he said, "Oh, I would, but I can't because I don't have the other seat." And so at that point, I squatted on the ground, just your classic squat.
Right.
And I said, "I can squat like this all day if I need to." Because I've been in India. I mean,
Right. Right.
she didn't sit in
You
chairs.
got
She
skills now.
squatted on the ground. And so he said, "Okay, fine." And well, it turns out he had this whole bed in the back, of the cab, and so I, sat there all day. So the first night we drive up out higher into the mountains. He opens up the back of his cab. It is just, there's nothing. It's just a steel box. And he said, "Okay, here, this is where you're sleeping tonight." And, I mean, I put every single thing I have on me. I wrap myself in and I mean, I'm used to living rough, and so I slept. And so then Yugoslavia, I think from there you go into Italy, and then we got to Chamonix in France, and the guy says, "I'm sorry, I'm out of money. I'm gonna, you're gonna have to get another ride." And I said, "I got $200."
You're a rich man.
I gave him my $200, and we gassed up and drove through France to Ostend, the Belgian border, where somebody from his trucking company met him. And so, then we got on the boat to England, and he gave me back $240
with interest.
And yeah, I mean, I saved his butt.
Right.
Really.
Right.
It's so he gives me back $240, and I got into London, sort of, East Commercial Road, Cockney, England, where a friend of mine was living in a squat that I'd met in Pakistan. And so I got there. I actually arrived on my birthday, sick as a dog, because I'd just been, on the road for so long.
Yeah, your body's just burned out.
Yeah. And so, next day I just kind of stayed in bed, and the next day I went down to get a ticket to the States, and my ticket cost was $230. But it was a flight from Paris to San Francisco. And so, I leave with basically 200. I've spent some money to get some jeans and that sort of thing. So basically, I've got 200. I get back 240. My ticket costs 230, but it cost me $9 to get from London to Paris to get on the plane. I arrived with $1.
Budgeting. It's all about budgeting.
It's all about budgeting. Yeah.
That is incredible. So
anyway, I think one of the most valuable lessons
yes, that's
ever
my question.
had
That was my question.
in business was after that trip, I'm back in McCall, Idaho, and it turns into winter, and I'm broke, and I go down to there's a local sort of co-op, and there's a letter for me there, and I open up the letter, and there's $50 in a round trip ticket to Portland with this guy says, "Come and see me," a guy that I'd met in before Asia in Central America. And so I was about to go down and catch the flight when my old friend Skip drives through town. He's on his way to the Oregon coast to go see this friend of his. And who turns out to be Sharon Davies, by the way.
Really? So your wife? Your wife?
Yeah. And so he drops me off at this guy's house outside of Portland, and the guy is, he wants to start a store with rugs and Afghan goods, and he's got a lot of cash money. Who knows where it came from? And so he just wants to pick my brain about it. And,
Right.
what do you know about this place? And after about 3 days, he says, "Yeah, okay, I'll just pay your way to go back to Asia, and show me the way." And so, I go from just like destitute to I'm on my way back to I'm on my way back to Asia. I walk into my parents' house and tell them this, and they're just like, "Oh God, how did you manage that?" My dad's like, "I just want to get you a job for Idaho Power, like
Yes.
me."
Yes. Yes. You can be happy just like me.
So we fly back we fly to England, and I actually have an appendicitis attack and get my appendix out there, which is a good thing, because if it would happen 2 weeks later, I probably would have died in Kabul.
Yes.
But and it was free medicine, completely free medicine in England at the time. And so we fly to Kabul on New Year's, and just start, cruising around and figuring out, rugs and textiles and just the whole, the panoply of Afghan goods in those days, like the jackets, the goat hair jackets, the sheepskin jackets that Jimi Hendrix used to wear, and that sort of thing, and all this embroidered, and Afghanistan just produced all this beautiful handwork. And we spent the winter going around buying stuff. And then at the end, Bradley said, "Oh yeah, I'm out of money." Second time this has happened. And I don't have enough money to pay for the hotel. So the guy that owns the hotel is going to let you stay here, but he's going to take your passport. And I'm going to go to Delhi, and I've got money there, and I'll get there, and I'll send it back. It won't take long. And so I go and I hang out with this Afghan friend of mine. Only I'm sitting on the other side of the counter. I'm sitting on the side of the counter that he's sitting on, and seeing business from his standpoint instead of, a young Western doesn't know anything kind of guy standpoint. I mean, it's just like the education that I received at that time. And it turned I think it was about 3.5 weeks, because this guy flew down to Delhi and got malaria and was sick for 3.5 weeks. Finally got better, went out to the airport, found somebody some hippie flying to Kabul, gave him enough money for me to get out of there and pay the hotel bill. And but that period of time was just
That was your pivoting point.
it was amazing. I mean,
That education changed
I
everything.
saw the jewelry business, the rug business, the stone business, textiles, everything passed through there, and I just sat and watched and digested.
Wow. Wow. So you started this off by your kind of the lesson learned. What was the lesson learned that when you started this topic? When you just sum it up, what did you learn?
Really, if you're patient And patience is a really good thing to learn in life.
Oh,
That's really
so
helpful.
painful.
That's what stress and all of
Yes.
the
Yes.
when money's tight and kids are yelling and it's patience that kind of gets you through all that.
So patience,
Um, yeah.
and everything
So
just
then
kind of works
so
out.
then on that same trip, after leaving Afghanistan, I went down to I met Bradley in Rishikesh. Well, Rishikesh was, the place where the Beatles met, hung out with the Maharishi back in
Right. Right.
those days, and it's where the Ganges comes shooting out of the mountains, and so and it's beautiful. I mean, just big, beautiful sandy beaches and temples everywhere. Very, very holy city. And so Bradley was there, but Bradley always had an agenda. And his agenda was, the um, I have to see the full moon on the Taj Mahal.
Ah.
And at the time, there was it was full moon in Rishikesh, and I'd met a few people, and it was just this incredibly, I don't know, the vibe was just incredibly high, and I was like, I mean, I can't leave right now. This is just, I don't care anything about seeing the Taj Mahal full moon. I ended up seeing it, but at the time there was just this magical energy that was happening, and it was from people I knew. Like there was a friend of mine who was an Anglo-Indian. His name was Tony McDonald, and anybody. So there'd always be this circle of people at Swami Brahmananda's place in Rishikesh, which was just right on the river, and anybody could walk in, and Tony would look at him and he'd tell him what their astrology was. He just could see it. He just and it was never wrong. And so Bradley says, okay, well, yeah, but Terry, I don't really have any money. And I said, so how much do you have? He said, 300 rupees. And I said, okay, fine, whatever. Bradley leaves. Tony looks at me and he says, God, I've always wanted to go to Kathmandu. I said, well, God, I got 300 rupees.
Let's go.
Let's go. And I mean, we, took third class trains across northern India and then busing into Kathmandu. And I arrived in Kathmandu, and so Bradley had said, okay, we're going to meet at the Kathmandu guest house. I said, okay, that sounds fine. So by this time, I've got 50 rupees. 50 rupees at the time was maybe $4. And I've still got Tony with me, and we're staying in this place called the Matchbox, which was 2 rupees a night. It was not a fancy hotel. and I could eat, and we could eat street food
Right.
for another 2 rupees.
Right.
So I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. I've got enough for 10, 12 days.
We're good. We're good.
And, I remember sitting around in this hotel and, just again, this group of people and, reading Krishnamurti and just, be here now and all of this sort of thing. And so the next day I go to the Kathmandu guest house and I say, I'm looking for this guy Bradley Alexander, and then the guy looks in his book and he says, oh, so I got this a little reversed anyway. He says, oh, Bradley just flew to Bangkok, and that's when I went back to the Matchbox and like, okay, I got enough for 12 days.
We're all set. That's
and so then
funny.
I went in and I'm sitting on one of the big temples in Durbar Square in Kathmandu, and Bradley rides by on a bicycle. And I yell at him and I said, Bradley, he said, I said, so why did you say that you had left for, he said, oh, I was just embarrassed to say I was changing hotels. Because, there was gonna be this whole trek that we were doing up to Annapurna Base, which, and he brought this friend of over from the States who was just kind of this worthless guy. And so we did this trek. And at the time, before the trek, I was living in a place, and I'm walking on this street called Tamil, which became the tourist center of Kathmandu. And at the time, there's nothing there. It's just a couple of there's one old Tibetan shop, and it's just tiny little shops, but not tourist oriented at all. Little local restaurants, little local pharmacies, that sort of thing. And there's this one little Tibetan shop, and I walked in, and I ended up having this relationship with this big old Tibetan woman who, she was called Amala. Amala in Tibetan means mother. And Amala was just turned out to be like a mother to me. I'd go see her, she'd feed me, and so I am going to, we go on this trek, and we go up to Annapurna Base, and then we're coming back. And this trek lasts for a month. And at some point, I'm quite high in the Himalaya. I was probably at 10,000 feet or so, because I know at 12,000 feet, that's where the snow and ice began. And that was the only time I wore shoes on the entire trek.
So you were out there. You were out there.
Yeah. The paths, you could call them highways in Nepal, are these paths that have been smoothed down for centuries.
Everyone
right?
walking hundreds
It's not
of
like
years.
a trekking trail. It's like these paths that people have been walking on for centuries,
for hundreds
and
of years.
building and making smooth. And that's how that's how porters would get food into villages. That's how Tibetans would come with their horses, and after getting salt in Tibet and taking it down into Nepal to trade, and that sort of thing.
So to sum up your life, you've got a place in Denver and then a place in Maui.
No.
Okay.
Park City and Jackson Hole.
And Jackson Hole. And do you still have the place in Maui? A home in Maui?
I don't have the big house in Maui, but I still do have a house on 2 acres in Maui, yes.
So where do you see yourself? You've had the businesses are gone now, as I assume, and you're going to focus on the nonprofit for educating.
No. My business in Ketchum is alive and well.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, thank you so
No,
much.
I'm still very much in business. And I was just, in November, I went because, I had this, when your wife of 45 years dies, it's kind of a shock. And you don't.
Kind of, yeah.
As my friend said, Terry, you were just a box of parts for a long, long time.
Yes, yes,
And so
yes.
I went to, I stayed at the house in Maui for a month and a half. And I went, yeah, this is beautiful. This is great. What am I going to do?
She went back to work.
I'm going to go back to work.
Good
And
for
so
you.
that's,
Good for you.
my work is, I don't
Your
know.
medicine.
I don't know if I will ever not, because it has a very powerful effect on a lot of people.
Yes, yes. So, okay, well, I'm going to wrap this up and thank you very much for this interview. I've been really looking forward to it. And maybe one day when I'm over in Maui, if I run into Daniel, he can hook me up with you and we can go from there. How's that?
Or if you ski, you can come to Sun Valley.
I don't got the legs no more.
Well, it's a beautiful place to come, and it's full. I don't know.